Hello and welcome to EPROM 9. The camera's slightly out of alignment, but oh well. This is, as you can probably guess from the title, about my macro camera. Yes, I finally acquired one. While in my 286 computer video I did mention it, the system the 286 computer came from is not where this camera came from. In fact, this had a proprietary connector sticking out the side of where the electrical tape's covering up the hole. I actually modified this to give it a proper connector, BNC, that I can hook it up to standard equipment. It's got all the converters and whatnot, so that's good. But what this basically is a BW CCTV camera. Now, I only got, well, I've salvaged all the optics, but from it I have created 3 separate lenses. We've got, and from another macro camera I pulled off of a dead pick and place machine, we have the super macro lens, really finicky to get focused, because you have to physically move the camera head up and down, and I'm currently working on a system to do that precisely, so we don't have to put up with any of that nonsense of shaky, although in this video you will have to put up with a bit of that because, well, hands are not perfectly still. I don't know why us humans naturally shake, but we do. So that lens came off that, which will be this camera board, and we will be putting that under the test. Sadly dead, which is why I'm not using it. This is our widest sort of zoom in, look at circuit boards in more detail. This is not look at dies of chips sort of zooming. This is our next one down, which is our next macro lens, which brings it to decent. You can certainly look at dies of chips and see them, but not all the details. This is when you start to get super fine, good for looking at low density EPROMs. In fact, all these are good for low density EPROMs. And this one will give you the closest possible vision I've got out of all the lenses. Ironically, apart from this one, they all increase in size, as you may notice, and most of that's just gap. Literally just full of empty until it gets the optics at the top, and then it's down to the type of the lens used. But yeah, you will be from now on in seeing some BW standard resolution, no HD nonsense video. And because it's a security camera, standard composite, standard thread, might be able to easily upgrade it in the future. You never know. Anyway, let's move on to the more interesting part of looking at some dies of chips. The 2 lenses we will be using predominantly in this video is this macro lens and this macro lens, the 2 finest, because what is the point in looking at them in less fine detail? This one I found a way to focus it accurately, so that's good. This one you'll have to put up a bit of camera shake unless I improvise a technique to solve that.
Recording good. Right, so let's get into it. EPROMs. This is a Tesla X4 MBHB 8708C. This is a 1970s part from, I believe, Russian origin. If we bring it this way, we can show you the little emblem logo of 2 crossed swords, which is quite a nice little emblem. And if we go the other way, in fact, it might be worth using the tweezers to move it around because it stops me obstructing the light. There you go, as you can see part of the emblem and the print work. Now, I've decided to go back on what I said about using the other lens, the finer lens, because this one reveals the detail I wanted to show anyway, and has the added bonus of actually being possible to focus. If I hold this, it's shaking over the place and you can't see jack. Now, one thing I'd like to first note is how much like core memory this looks. Now, I actually have a photo of some core memory that I took back at college, and I'll be splicing that in if I remember to do that. I may not remember, so bear with me there. So as you can see, you've got your two main arrays and basically all the control logic around it, much like core memory. I can see why this sort of stuff sort of evolved from it. Now, interestingly, I'd like to note some interesting points. I'll see if I can point to the general area. There you go. That X there, and in the top corner up there, you can also see another X. I'll see if I can also dig out a better pointing device. A needle would probably be perfect, but I don't have one here. Let's try like that. Yeah, that's better. So that X and that. Now, I'm not exactly entirely sure what these are, but I'm guessing they would have been markings for the computer that would have had to do the bond wiring and whatnot. A bit like fiducial marks. Also, interestingly, in this area by the X, we have this little array of circuitry here. Now, I'm not entirely sure what that is. It's difficult to really see. I mean, we're only dealing with standard resolution here. HD would certainly be an improvement, again, looking on the details, because this would be a case where digital zoom would be useful. Now, interestingly, even in the center section here, you can see that they are both linked into the array, much like core memory would be, and in fact have control electronics going out, because it's in a very much Y axis, XY axis, that's it. Now, if we move it along to the other side, we come to our first bit of text that is actually legible. And that's this little beastie down in the corner here that you've probably already identified, the U555. Now, I'm not entirely sure what that means. It's very difficult to make out, because obviously you can't see it when you look at it with your eyes. But you've got it in part of the array, because one thing you'll notice, there's a lot of traces, and also here it looks like there's an 05 at the very bottom. It's difficult to pinpoint exactly what that is. There's also a square at the very bottom there, which could be part of the fiducial markings, and these bond wires actually look like they're soldered. It's difficult to tell for sure, but rather than your standard bonding method that you'd usually get on a die, they actually look like they've had some form of soldering, but that could just be due to the focus not being quite on them, due to a narrower focus depths. Now, this is a good time to go into EPROMs and how they work, and they work via floating gate arrays. And the idea behind it, I have to dig back into my memory for this, because it's been a while since I've looked it up. Now, the floating gate basically traps an electron to instantiate a bit, whether it's a 1, and doesn't have an electron for a 0. Now, I may be wrong, and that could be the reverse way round. It's been a while since I've looked into this. But you can actually just about make out all the tiny dots which make each individual floating point transistor, which is actually quite interesting. So you could actually sit there and count them all for yourself, but from the markings on the chip, it is basically an 8K chip, so you're certainly not going to be sticking Battlefield 3 or something on there, although why you'd want to play that game, I do not know. But I find it quite an interesting chip to look at. And it's quite interesting to see that you can see a very sort of similar structure to a core memory, and all the control electronics are very much focused around the edges in the center. And this section here at the bottom must most definitely be buffers, sort of amplifiers, because remember, we're sort of looking the single electrons here, so we haven't got very strong signals. Now, I'm going to see. Now, one thing that comes up straight away is the part number. I don't even need to tell you the part number, but you might not be able to make it out. Down about there is a very clear NEC D8755. It doesn't have the A part, but that is an obvious. Oh, whoops! I just jogged the table. Now I'm shaking my leg, so the camera might be shaking. is a very obvious mark. For God's sakes, my stupid me forgetting what I'm going to say. It's a very obvious marking of the chip that would identify it. Now, interestingly, you can also see the bond wires better in this chip, and that it uses a different method of attaching the bond wires themselves to the die, which is actually quite interesting. You've got very similar sort of structure in that you've got even a date code. We have a date code to this beast, which is fantastic. I'm going to use that to try and focus it a bit better. No, that's worse. That'll do. That's a good sweet spot. But you can see that it was built in 1978. We didn't get that luxury on the Tesla chip. Now you can also notice you could probably actually see the detail slightly better, despite being an 8755, so I'm not exactly sure on its exact bit rate. I think it might actually be less than 8K. But I'm not sure. I'd need someone else who's a bit better at identifying. Now, interestingly, once again, like core memory, the driver circuitry is surrounded to around the floating point transistor arrays, which are also noticed in EPROMs, are generally split up into two sections, which are then accessed from all around. Now, interestingly, you can notice there's two main access points to the arrays. The centre, where you can see a lot going on, and the top of the chip. Not so much the bottom or the either two sides, although you can certainly see points where there are connections into the array. For example, I've noticed there's this big trace here. Well, I say big, really microscopic. You can see it going round and round, and that looks almost like a ground plane, or maybe it's a positive plane, so it could either be plus 5 volts, or as many would call it 0 volt, but I'll call it the negative. I don't know why they say 0 volts, but technically it's not 0 volts, that's a lie. You've also got these two strange markings over here that are a bit like a capacitor. Now, it's a shame I don't know more about chip structure, because this is very much an unknown. It gets into very squiggly line territory. But interestingly, when I put my tweezers like that, you can see the light reflect down the bottom here, and it makes it easier to identify some of the traces and where they're going down there. So we've established we can add all these on the live. We've also got what looks to be text up there, but, well, I lack the ability to zoom in any more than this. I might be able to do something in editing, though. The next chip, I reckon, but these are extremely ancient 1979 A and D, so they're a year older than the chip I just showed you, which is actually a white ceramic one. The Tesla one is a nice sort of purple ceramic, purpley grey sort of chip colour. Very pretty to look at. Now this one, as you might be able to see, only has one array, and it has a part number of 2716, so that's 16K. That's 16,000 bytes. There's no bits, not bytes. So instantly you can actually see the structure of this one even better, and probably actually the best chip to see the individual structure. So if we get this into the right sort of position, there's no visible text or identification like the previous two chips. Nothing like that, which is kind of sad, really. But what we do have is a very clear section of the array. We can clearly see that the bottom here is where the array is accessed, along with this side here. We've also got clear power traces going around the whole chip. And we also have several bond points, and it seems bonded very similar to the previous chip, unlike the Tesla, which seemed to have a very unique method of bonding. Our main sections of control circuitry seem to sit along this part and the top of the chip, from how you can see it. We've also got an interesting section of control over here that I'm not entirely sure exactly what it does, but basis on how a lot of the power planes seem to be going on, it could be some form of voltage regulation. We get to voltage regulators actually shortly. But I find that also quite interesting. I've got a number of other chips to show you that could be of interest. That's the focus just about right. Now we can instantly see text on the chip. Let me just position it. One advantage of BW is it's extremely sensitive to infrared light. Now, instantly, down there, you can see the manufacturer of the chip, Altera. It's just visible. You can also see what isn't actually a part number of Z1, what looks to be DOS, but is probably 00S. That is not actually a part number on the chip, but it does have a date code of 84. This is back before Altair was really an FPGA. This would be something like a CPLD or maybe something else. Now, interestingly, the Tesla chip might actually be the oldest because all the previous ones seem to have the same bonding methods. You've got a number of arrays, like EPROM arrays, but also you've got a lot more circuitry. You've got 4 sections of main circuitry that will do microprocessor actions. I will show you a microprocessor later. As well as what are EPROM memory arrays, several of them. Now, this could be something like a CBLD, an early predecessor to an FPGA. I'm not 100% sure. To be honest, I haven't actually put the part number into Google, so I'm not exactly 100% sure what it does. But it's interesting you come across these little markings here and there. Now, interestingly, in the middle here, we've got this bit that almost looks like the traces have been bunched together for something. Some of these chips you can also notice layers. Now, interestingly, this looks like it's a Cert 555, as I've mentioned. Repeating yourself too much, are you? There looks to be what looks to be text in the middle, but it's difficult to make out. But you can also make out it's a lot more simple compared to the previous chips that we saw before. We've got a number of points where bond wires once were before the absolute arse got blown out of this chip, and we can even see where the blast originated in that point there towards the chip's left. But you can see in detail more of the chip, which is actually really interesting. But this chip, which has since gained some dust, that I have now blown most of it off, is a 17411,992. I have not researched what that is. But once again, you can see the full chip structure. There's no part markings on it, there's no text. But interestingly, there is that trace going all the way up the middle. What that is, I don't know. It also resembles the bond wires of the EPROMs, which is actually quite an interesting observation. Will this chip still work? Don't know, you'd have to test it. But interestingly, you've got those two, what look to be little pads with semicircles in, mounted on about the middle of all the 4 corners for sections of the chip. They look a bit like valves or sort of eyes looking back at you. I'm not sure what they are because I don't know the chip structure. But interestingly, the chip looks like it's about a 2-layer chip because once again these are done in layers. And how the hell they got 1970s tech to actually build these things, I don't know, because it's just so fine. You know, you touch one of those bond wires of a pair of tweezers and you break them. And it's very nice to focus on. Now, one thing I would like to note instantly. On one hand, the integration is a lot more, but on another hand, look at the bottom. It looks like it's a lot less because the traces are a lot finer. You can't really make out the internals of the array. But you'll notice it's not divided up into the single 2-cell system that EPROMs normally house, but instead divided up into many different sections. In fact, you could arguably say that there are 6 and 6 is 12 different sections. Now this also has the correct part number actually printed on it, which is a 27C240. It's a bit difficult to make out there. You can also make out what looks to be an A on the very back and a T at the front, which stands for Texas Instruments, which is who made it. And you can even see down in the very tiny corner a little TI logo with some more text above it. That's cute. But the array, I can't go the full way up thanks to the thing the camera's standing on, blocking it. But you get the idea of how the thing is constructed. It's a bit difficult. Oh yeah, CCDs are pretty to look at, but you can't really see the detail. But once again, you've got an array, you've got evidence that these chips sort of evolved from a microprocessor. More specifically, an Intel Pentium with the MXX tech, I think. But this particular one was an i33 variant, because on the bottom ceramic you'd see i33 or IPP. Now I'm going to try and push this camera out as far as I can so you can see the die. And you can see it's very difficult to really make anything individual out. You can also see the cover on it I've got is covered in dust and scratches. All these little squiggly hairs. And also the bond wires are damaged as hell because I broke this open by whacking it against the scaffolding pole when I was bored, ironically. And then I did it to another one on purpose so I could see the chip. And once again, it is pretty awesome, but I can't really identify anything specific to you in here. And I just defocused the whole chip. Well done, Simon. You wouldn't believe the primitive method I'm using to do this. But there doesn't seem to be any particular mark. You can see just how many bond wires this thing has. You know, it's a lot. This is a full microprocessor from the 90s. Because it's good old Pentium. Now, interestingly, it looks like, no, I thought that might have been text, but it just looks like control buffers and stuff. So yeah, that's a little look at ICs, and also a little look at my macro camera that will allow me to do more videos like this. So do make comments on what you think of this format and the idea of actually looking at chip dies themselves. I personally find it fascinating, but other people may disagree. I will do my best to edit out the crappy bits, don't worry. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed, and I hope you found it as interesting as I do, looking at the structure of ICs